On a frozen Minneapolis street, two street thugs thought they had found an easy target. A beautiful young woman walking alone in the snow, tired, silent, and cornered by fear. They laughed, filmed her, and pushed too far, believing no one would stop them. But just steps away stood a quiet man with a calm German shepherd at his side, watching without a word. When one of the thugs made the fatal mistake of kicking the dog, the night changed forever. They had no idea the man they mocked was a Navy SEAL on forced leave, a soldier trained in silence, restraint, and precision. In seconds, the bullies were down, but that small act of justice was only the beginning. What Ronan didn't know was that this moment would pull him into a deadly hunt, involving a powerful private security network, a murdered journalist, and a truth someone was willing to kill to keep buried. As snow fell and the city slept, loyalty, faith, and courage would be tested in ways no one expected. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of hope, sacrifice, and redemption. Late afternoon in early February found Minneapolis wrapped in falling snow, light as silver ash. The wind threading cold fingers between red brick buildings and trembling neon signs, the city holding its breath as day slowly surrendered to night. Myra Halden moved quickly along the sidewalk near the light rail station boots, crunching softly against the frozen slush. She was 27, tall enough to draw attention without trying, her figure slender but strong from years of standing through long clinic shifts. A thick wool coat hugged her frame, and a charcoal scarf covered half her face, but it could not hide her eyes, clear gray-blue, alert, in the way of someone who had learned to read danger early. Dark blonde hair escaped her knit beanie in loose strands curling against pale skin, flushed pink by the cold. Myra had just finished a 12-hour shift at a private medical clinic, the kind that drained more from the mind than the body, and fatigue sat behind her eyes like a weight she could not shake. She wanted only the quiet of her apartment, hot water, and sleep that did not involve alarms or emergency calls. The street was busy enough to feel safe, but impersonal enough to be cruel. People passed with heads down, shoulders hunched, everyone sealed inside their own small war against winter. Myra sensed them before she saw them, laughter too loud, footsteps careless in a way that assumed the world would move aside. Kip stepped out first from the liquor store doorway, thin as a wire fence, his jacket too light for the weather, and his movements twitchy with restless energy. He was the kind of man who filled silence because he feared what might surface if he stopped talking. His nose was sharp, his cheeks hollow, and his grin had learned arrogance instead of kindness. Beside him lumbered Noel, broad-shouldered and heavy, a man who relied on size rather than speed. Noel's shaved head glistened with melting snow, and a cheap hooded sweatshirt strained at the seams of his thick neck. He moved slowly, confidently, as if the city belonged to him simply because he took up space in it. "There she is," Kip said, not bothering to lower his voice, his phone already in his hand. "Smile for the camera, sweetheart. It's freezing out here. You should warm us up." Myra felt her spine stiffen. She adjusted her pace, angling toward the brighter side of the street, but Kip mirrored her steps with mocking precision. Noel laughed, a low sound that vibrated in his chest, and drifted closer, blocking her path as casually as someone leaning against a bar. "Come on," Noel said, eyes sweeping over her face with ownership he had not earned. Just one smile. "We're just having fun." Myra's pulse quickened. She tightened her grip on her bag keys, biting into her palm, and met Kip's gaze. "I'm not interested," she said, her voice calm but edged with exhaustion. "Leave me alone." Kip's grin widened, sharpened by the refusal. He lifted his phone higher, angling it toward her face. "See, she's shy. That's cute." Around them the city pretended not to notice. A man adjusted his headphones. A woman crossed the street. Snow fell indifferent, collecting at the curb like a witness that would not speak. At the corner beneath the awning of a small coffee shop stood Ronan Vale, He looked carved rather than born, his frame broad and compact shoulders filling the worn canvas jacket he wore as if it were part of him. At 38, his face carried the geometry of a man who had seen violence close enough to count its breaths. A square jaw shadowed by a short, well-kept beard, a faint scar near his right eyebrow, and eyes dark and steady, the color of deep winter water. Those eyes did not wander. They observed. Ronan had learned long ago that survival favored those who listened more than they spoke. Beside him sat Sable, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat dusted white by falling snow. The dog's posture was flawless, spine straight-weight, balanced ears pricked forward as if tuned to frequencies humans missed. Sable's amber eyes tracked movement with quiet intelligence, the discipline of a working dog still etched into every muscle. He was powerful without being restless, calm without being soft. A faint notch marked one ear, an old training injury that never quite healed and never slowed him down. Ronan watched the exchange without moving, a familiar tension coiling low in his chest. It was not anger that stirred him, but recognition. He had seen this pattern in too many places: crowded streets, foreign markets, base towns where cruelty passed for entertainment. He had learned over years he did not like to remember that small acts of intimidation were often the doorway to worse ones. Kip reached out, fingers grazing the edge of Mira's scarf, a mockery of intimacy. Mira flinched despite herself stepping back on the slick pavement. Her heels slid and she windmilled slightly to regain balance. Noel laughed again. That was when Sable growled. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was a single low vibration that cut through the air like a blade. The sound shifted the space around them, bending attention in its direction. Noel glanced down at the dog, surprised irritation flickering across his face. Ronan spoke then. His voice was calm, controlled, not raised yet. It carried with it the weight of finality. She said no. Kip turned startled annoyance, flashing into something more volatile when he saw Ronan. "You talking to us, mountain man?" he sneered, stepping closer as if to test the distance. "Mind your business." Ronan stepped forward, not rushing, not threatening, but claiming space with quiet authority. Each step pressed his boots into fresh snow, deliberate, measured. He placed himself between Mira and the two men, his body forming a barrier without theatrics. Sable remained seated, eyes never leaving Noel. "Your business ended when you touched her," Ronan said. His hand rested lightly on Sable's collar, more reassurance than restraint. "Walk away." Noel scoffed and nudged a nearby trash bin with his boot, sending it scraping noisily across the ice. Emboldened by Kip's presence, he shoved Mira's shoulder, not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to make a point. Mira stumbled again, fear flaring hot and sharp behind her ribs. Ronan's gaze hardened, something ancient and disciplined tightening behind his eyes. He moved. What followed was fast and precise, devoid of the wildness Kip expected. Ronan caught Kip's wrist as the thinner man lunged forward, twisting it with controlled force until Kip cried out, his phone clattering into the snow. Ronan pivoted smoothly, using Kip's momentum to bring him down, pressing him face first into the slush without striking his head. Noel surged forward, swinging clumsily, but Ronan sidestepped, hooked a foot behind Noel's ankle, and used his weight against him. The larger man went down hard, breath leaving his lungs in a startled grunt. Sable did not move from his position, but his presence loomed, a silent promise written in muscle and teeth. "Enough," Ronan said, his voice low, close to Kip's ear. "Apologize, then leave." Kip's bravado collapsed into panic. "I'm sorry," he gasped, words tumbling over each other as he glanced at Mira. "I'm sorry. We were just joking." Ronan released him and stepped back, watching as Kip scrambled to his feet and hauled Noel upright. The two men retreated down the street, cursing softly, humiliation staining their voices. As Noel turned away, Mira noticed a small, unfamiliar tattoo just below his ear, half hidden by his hood, a symbol she could not place but would not forget. Silence rushed in where noise had been. Mira stood, shaking breath shallow, the delayed tremor of fear catching up with her. Ronan turned to her, his posture easing the edge, leaving his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. Mira nodded, swallowing hard. "I think so. Thank you." Ronan gave a brief nod in return, already stepping back toward the coffee shop awning. "Get home safe." As he turned away, snow settling on his shoulders, and Sable rising smoothly to heel beside him, Mira felt something shift inside her. She did not yet know that this small intersection of lives on a winter street would echo far beyond this night, but as the wind carried the sound of retreating footsteps, and the city resumed its indifferent rhythm, one truth settled quietly into place. Some guardians did not announce themselves, and some jokes once spoken could never be taken back. The snow thickened as the sun finally slipped behind the skyline, turning Minneapolis into a muted world of gold and shadow where streetlights painted long reflections across ice-glazed pavement. What had begun as an ugly interruption now stretched into something heavier, as if the city itself sensed a fracture opening beneath its surface. Kip and Noel did not retreat far. Pride once wounded has a way of bleeding into stupidity. They circled the block-breath steaming curses muttered into scarves damp with melting snow. Kip paced like a nervous animal, replaying the humiliation in his mind, his thin fingers flexing as if still feeling Ronan's grip on his wrist. He had built his personality around noise and bravado. Silence made him itch. Noel, slower and more dangerous in his thinking, said little. His wide shoulders hunched against the cold, but his eyes were alert, calculating. The shove he had given Mira replayed in his memory not as a mistake, but as an insult unanswered. On the back of his neck, half hidden beneath his hood, the small tattoo seemed to burn against his skin, a reminder of allegiances that did not tolerate weakness. Mira, meanwhile, stood a block away beneath the glow of a pharmacy sign, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. The adrenaline was ebbing now, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She had been afraid before any woman learns that early, but this fear carried a sharper edge because it had come so suddenly in a place that should have been ordinary. Her reflection in the dark window startled her pale face, eyes too bright, breath uneven. She straightened her shoulders, a habit drilled into her during long nights at the clinic when panic had to be swallowed for the sake of patients. Ronan had stepped in without hesitation, and though gratitude warmed her chest, it also left a hollow ache. Men like him did not appear by accident. They were shaped. Ronan had moved back under the coffee shop awning, Sable settling beside him with a soft huff, snow clinging to the dog's whiskers. The shop's door opened and closed behind them, releasing brief waves of warmth and the smell of roasted beans. But Ronan remained outside. His attention stayed on the street, not Mira. He did not watch people the way curious men did. He watched the way soldiers did, scanning for patterns, exits, anomalies. The encounter had scraped old instincts, raw ones he preferred buried beneath routine and quiet days. He told himself it was over. He told himself to leave. Sable shifted, muscles tightening, his ears angled not toward the passing traffic, but down the block where Kip and Noel reappeared like stains refusing to wash away. Ronan felt it then, the subtle tightening behind his ribs that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with inevitability. Kip spotted Mira first and grinned feral and relieved. Round two, he muttered, lifting his phone again. Noel's mouth twisted into something that resembled a smile, but his gaze slid past Mira, locking onto Ronan. Recognition sparked there, followed by something colder. This was no longer about the woman. This was about reclaiming dominance. They approached more cautiously this time, spreading slightly as they walked, unconsciously mimicking tactics they had learned from other predators, other streets. Mira backed closer to the pharmacy wall keys clenched in her fist. She glanced toward Ronan, not calling out, not wanting to provoke anything worse, but her eyes asked the question her pride would not. Ronan answered by stepping forward again, placing himself squarely between Mira and the two men. His stance was relaxed, but his weight balanced ready. Sable remained seated, but his tail was still his focus absolute. "You didn't get enough the first time," Kip asked, forcing a laugh. His cheeks were flushed either from cold or drink. "You can't babysit her all night." Ronan's expression did not change. "Last warning." Noel scoffed and took another step, his boot crunching loudly on the ice. "You think you're some kind of hero," he said. His voice was deep, roughened by cigarettes and disuse of kindness. "You don't know who you're dealing with." That was when the wrong touch happened. Not a shove this time, but something more deliberate. Kip lunged sideways, quick and spiteful, his foot swinging out toward Sable's flank. A test of power, a declaration that nothing here was sacred. The movement was small, almost casual. It was also catastrophic. Sable reacted faster than thought, his body surging forward in a controlled explosion of motion. He did not bite. He did not lunge wildly. He snapped air, popping inches from Kip's shin, a warning so precise it stopped the man mid-step. Snow sprayed. Kip stumbled backward, eyes wide, the bravado draining from his face like color from frostbitten skin. Ronan moved at the same instant. His hand closed on Kip's jacket collar, twisting and pulling him off balance, while his other arm swept low, hooking behind Kip's knee. Kip went down hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs in a startled wheeze. Before Noel could react, Ronan pivoted his shoulder, slamming into the larger man's chest, using Noel's own mass against him. Noel hit the pavement with a meaty thud, the sound echoing off brick and glass. This was not a fight. It was a correction. Ronan knelt briefly, pressing Kip's shoulder into the snow, just long enough to make a point, his voice low and steady. "You walk away. Now." Noel scrambled upright, panic overtaking pride. He grabbed Kip by the arm, hauling him to his feet, muttering curses as they retreated down the street, slipping once, then breaking into an uncoordinated run. The city swallowed them quickly, the sound of their footsteps fading into the wind. Only then did Ronan step back. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft hiss of falling snow. Mira sagged against the wall, her knees suddenly weak. Ronan turned toward her, concern flickering briefly across his otherwise controlled features. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again. Mira nodded, though her voice shook when she spoke. "Yes, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "They'll come back, won't they?" Ronan considered that, his jaw tightening slightly. Maybe he said honestly, but not tonight. He turned away, then, as if closing a door, Sable rose and followed without command, padding quietly at his side. Mira watched them go, something unresolved twisting in her chest. She did not know Ronan's name, she did not know his past, but she knew the look of someone who carried weight that never truly left. What none of them saw was the man across the street, half hidden in the doorway of a closed dry cleaner, his coat long and dark, his face narrow and sharp beneath a pulled-down beanie. His name was Elias Crow, and he was not drunk, not afraid, and not impressed. Elias was in his early 40s, lean to the point of gauntness, with deep-set eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled. Years spent in private security had carved discipline into his posture and suspicion into his habits. He held his phone steady, recording the second confrontation from start to finish, his thumb already hovering over the send icon. Elias lowered the phone and studied Ronan's retreating back with interest. He recognized controlled violence when he saw it. He also recognized Sable's movement for what it was, not a pet's reflex, but trained restraint. That combination did not belong on a snowy Minneapolis street by accident. Elias turned and disappeared into the alley, boots silent on the packed snow. Somewhere across the city, a message chimed, and a quiet network took note. Ronan did not feel it yet, but the bell had rung. Not loudly, not for the public to hear, but clearly enough for those who listened for such sounds. He and Sable reached the end of the block and vanished into the dim maze of side streets, leaving Mira standing beneath the pharmacy sign, snow settling on her coat like ash after a fire. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Tomorrow she would go back to the clinic. Tomorrow life would pretend to be normal again, but tonight had marked her the way sudden cold marks skin. She looked once more down the street where Ronan had gone and realized with a clarity that surprised her that some rescues were not endings. They were invitations. Night settled fully over Minneapolis, thick and soundless, the kind of cold that pressed against windows and made even familiar streets feel foreign. Ronan Vale drove through the outer neighborhoods with one hand on the wheel and the other resting loosely near Sable's collar, the heater humming softly as if afraid to disturb the silence. Snow swept sideways across the windshield, blurring streetlights into pale halos. This was not a night meant for endings, yet Ronan felt the unmistakable pull of one. The rental house sat on a narrow cul-de-sac, modest and clean, its porch light casting a small, defiant circle against the snow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and old coffee. Sable shook himself once snow scattering across the mat, then moved deeper into the house, inspecting corners out of habit. Ronan peeled off his jacket slowly, the events of the street replaying behind his eyes with unwelcome clarity. He had told himself after the last operation that forced his leave that he was done stepping into other people's chaos. Yet chaos had found him anyway, wearing familiar faces and stranger intentions. Ronan had not wanted to come back to Minneapolis. The city held too many echoes, training runs along frozen riverbanks, late-night arguments with Galen over beers gone warm, promises made casually because both men believed there would always be time. The mandatory leave had been phrased in bureaucratic language, but Ronan understood the truth beneath it. Something had gone wrong overseas, something officially unresolved, and men like him were easier to manage when kept still. Galen had been the one to insist Ronan stay nearby to rest, to let the city hold him for a while. Ronan had agreed more out of exhaustion than persuasion. Sable paused near the kitchen doorway, head tilting slightly. Ronan noticed the change immediately. He trusted Sable's instincts more than his own on nights like this. "You smell something," Ronan murmured. Sable's ears pricked forward, a low sound, barely audible, forming deep in his chest. Not a growl, but a warning shaped by restraint. Ronan checked his watch. Galen should have been home hours ago. He debated calling, then dismissed the thought. Galen hated unnecessary check-ins. Instead, Ronan reached for his coat again and clipped the leash to Sable's collar. The drive to North Loop took 15 minutes, the city growing denser as they moved inward. Galen's apartment building stood among converted warehouses, brick and steel softened by trendy lighting and glass doors. Ronan parked across the street, something uneasy tightening behind his ribs. Experience had taught him that dread rarely announced itself loudly. It crept. Inside the lobby, lights flickered, one bulb buzzing faintly. The elevator was out of order, a handwritten sign taped crookedly across the doors. Ronan took the stairs, two at a time, Sable pacing silently at his side. On the fourth floor, Sable stopped abruptly. His hackles rose a sharp ridge along his spine. The door to Galen's apartment stood ajar. Ronan slowed, every sense sharpening. The smell hit him first, a metallic tang beneath the stale warmth of indoor air. He pushed the door open with his boot hand, already moving instinctively toward where a weapon should have been. The apartment was in disarray, a chair overturned, papers scattered like fallen leaves. A bookshelf, half emptied, its contents spilled across the floor. Then he saw Galen. Galen Rye lay near the kitchen island, one arm twisted beneath him, his body unnaturally still. He was 34, lean and tall, with the kind of face that looked perpetually curious. Sharp nose, expressive brows, dark hair that never quite behaved. Galen had always moved as if he were late for something important, words tumbling over each other when he talked, energy crackling beneath his skin. Now that energy was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt obscene. Ronan dropped to his knees beside him, fingers already at Galen's neck, searching for a pulse he knew would not be there. The skin was cold, too cold. A single gunshot wound marred Galen's chest, precise and centered. Ronan's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. This was not panic. This was not chance. For a moment, grief surged, hot and suffocating, threatening to knock the breath from his lungs. Ronan forced it down, packing it away the way he had learned to do, in places where mourning got people killed. He cataloged details instead, the lack of forced entry beyond the doorframe damage, the electronics untouched, the way Galen's wallet lay open on the counter as if placed there deliberately. Sirens approached quickly, too quickly. Red and blue light washed across the apartment walls as if the city itself were intruding. Ronan rose slowly, hands visible, as officers flooded the space. Sable remained seated near Galen's body, unmoving eyes dark and watchful. Detective Orman Pell arrived moments later, his presence filling the room with a weary authority. Pell was in his mid-50s, thick around the waist, his once black hair thinned and streaked with gray. His face bore the permanent sag of disappointment, eyes dulled by years of compromise. He took in the scene with a glance that lingered too briefly on Galen's body and too long on Ronan. "Looks like a break-in gone bad," Pell said, already scribbling in his notebook. "Drugs, maybe. These freelance types get mixed up in things." Ronan's hands curled into fists. "That's not what this is," he said, voice tight. "This was an execution." Pell's eyes flicked up, irritation flashing. "You related, cousin?" "Then you're too close," Pell replied smoothly. "Let us do our job." Ronan stepped forward, anger edging dangerously close to the surface, but an officer's hand pressed against his chest, guiding him back. He caught one last glimpse of Galen's face before he was ushered into the hallway, the apartment door closing with a final hollow click. Outside, snow fell heavier, muffling the city. Ronan stood beneath a streetlight, breath fogging the air, Sable pressed against his leg like an anchor. He replayed Pell's words, the casual dismissal, the speed with which conclusions had been drawn. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. A memory surfaced then, sharp as broken glass. 2 days earlier, Galen had shown up unannounced at Ronan's rental, eyes bright with a nervous energy Ronan had not seen before. He had brought a package not for Ronan but for Sable. The collar inside was thick, heavy-duty nylon stitched with unusual care. Galen had smiled too quickly when Ronan asked why. For heavy loads, Galen had said, forcing a laugh. "Keep it close. Don't trust anyone." Ronan's gaze dropped now to Sable's collar, dark against the dog's thick fur. His pulse quickened. He knelt in the snow, fingers tracing the inside seam, feeling carefully. There, a slight irregularity beneath the padding. Ronan retrieved a small knife from his pocket and sliced the stitching with surgical precision. A micro SD card slipped into his palm. Ronan closed his fist around it, the cold biting into his skin. The truth settled in with brutal clarity. Galen had known he was in danger. He had planned for this. He had chosen Ronan and Sable as the last safe place for whatever he had uncovered. Ronan looked up at the falling snow breath, steady despite the storm inside him. Galen had not died because he was careless. He had died because he had been right, and now the weight of that truth rested squarely in Ronan's hand. Ronan chose the place carefully, the way he had once chosen safe houses in cities whose names he was no longer allowed to say. The 24-hour print and internet shop squatted at the edge of an industrial zone south of downtown, a concrete box between a shuttered loading dock and a frozen rail spur. Sodium lights hummed overhead, casting the snow in sickly orange pools. The kind of place where people came to disappear for a few hours, not to be remembered. Inside, the air smelled of toner-burnt coffee and overheated circuitry. A young attendant with acne scars and tired eyes barely looked up from his phone when Ronan paid cash and took the back booth. Ronan's shoulders remained loose, but his spine was straight alert, every sense tuned outward. Sable lay beneath the narrow desk, his black and tan body folded neatly, amber eyes reflecting the dim light from the monitor. To anyone else, he looked like a large, well-behaved pet. To Ronan, he was an early warning system that had never failed. The micro SD card slid into the reader with a soft click that sounded far too loud in Ronan's ears. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared stark and unadorned, labeled Frost Klein. Ronan's jaw tightened. Galen had always liked cold names for hot truths. He opened it. Files bloomed across the screen, shipping manifests. Encrypted emails, satellite stills of rail yards and warehouses buried under snow. The pattern emerged quickly, horrifying in its precision. Stonevale Group, a private security firm with contracts stamped clean and legal on paper, was using nighttime rail transfers to move restricted military hardware optics, smart munitions components, drone guidance units through Minneapolis as a temporary artery. From here, the cargo bled outward, sold to buyers who paid in blood and silence. The leader's name was missing, replaced by symbols and time codes, but the schedules were meticulous. This was not chaos. This was a machine. Ronan felt the grief for Galen twist into something colder and harder. His cousin had not stumbled onto a crime. He had uncovered a system. Sable shifted under the desk. Ronan froze, eyes lifting to the dark reflection on the black screen. A shape moved where no shape should have been. Outside the front windows, an engine idled without headlights. An SUV, matte black, parked too perfectly to be coincidence. 3 doors opened. 3 men stepped out. Their movements were synchronized, economical, not street muscle. Professionals. Ronan yanked the card free and slid it into his pocket. "Heal," he murmured, barely moving his lips. Sable rose soundlessly. The first suppressed shot shattered the front glass in a dull, concussive thump. Panic erupted instantly, chairs scraping, someone screaming, the attendant diving behind the counter. Ronan didn't look back. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it through the rear exit window, the blast of powder and glass creating a whiteout. He ran. The alley was narrow, choked with snow and trash. Ronan felt heat tear across his left shoulder as a round grazed him, the impact spinning him slightly. He kept moving, teeth clenched, Sable glued to his leg. They vaulted a chain-link fence cut between loading bays, vanished into the night. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, too distant to matter. By the time Ronan ducked into a stairwell 3 blocks away, his sleeve was soaked dark. The pain arrived late, sharp and insistent. He pressed his palm to the wound, breathing through it. A hospital was impossible. He could almost feel Detective Pell's indifferent eyes turning him over to Stonevale like an unwanted package. There was only one name left that felt untouched by this web. Mira Halden was finishing her charting when she saw him across the clinic parking lot, standing half in shadow near the dumpsters. Snow dusted his beard and shoulders, making him look carved from winter itself. Blood streaked his jacket. For a heartbeat, fear seized her. Then she saw his eyes, not wild, not pleading, just honest in their desperation. "Please," Ronan said quietly when she approached, keys clenched between her fingers like before. "I wouldn't come if I had another option." Mira hesitated, every warning drilled into her since childhood, screaming at once. Then the nurse in her won. She led him inside through a staff entrance, heart hammering, mind already triaging, in a storage room that smelled of antiseptic and latex. She cut away the fabric, cleaned the wound with steady hands that trembled only at first. Mira was tall and slim, her dark blonde hair pulled into a loose bun that had escaped hours ago, her pale skin flushed with focus. She worked the way she lived, quietly, thoroughly, refusing to rush, even when afraid. "You're being hunted," she said, not as a question, tying off a stitch. Yes, by who people who killed my cousin. She finished the last stitch and looked up at him. Then you can't stay here. Before he could answer, her phone buzzed. A citywide alert lit the screen. Neighborhood lockdown. Armed suspect at large. Shelter in place. Mira laughed once, sharp and humorless. That was fast. Ronan nodded. It's a lie. They're clearing the board. Mira thought of the bald man she had seen the night before, his collar turned up, the snake-like tattoo behind his ear, flashing briefly under fluorescent lights. She told Ronan, watched his face harden as the pieces aligned. When he said they had to leave, she didn't argue. Some decisions, once seen clearly, stopped being choices. They moved through side streets, avoiding main roads, where police lights flashed blue against falling snow. The Mississippi lay ahead, black and broad, its banks lined with the skeletons of abandoned warehouses. The one Ronan chose had once been a grain depot, its brick walls thick and scarred windows boarded, roof groaning in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of rust and old river water. It was cold enough that their breath fogged white. "This is where my team trained," Ronan said quietly, as if confessing something. "Years ago." Mira looked around, imagining young men learning violence in this hollow place. She wrapped her arms around herself, then straightened when Ronan handed her a pistol taken from a dead drop hidden behind a loose brick. He showed her how to hold it, how to breathe, how not to freeze. His voice was calm, patient, stripped of bravado. "I don't want this," she admitted, hands shaking as she practiced the stance. "No one ever does," Ronan replied. "That doesn't mean you won't survive it." Outside, the wind howled through broken glass like something alive. Sable paced the perimeter, nails clicking softly on concrete, a dark sentinel against the snow-lit doorway. Mira watched the dog, then Ronan, realizing the truth settling heavy in her chest. She had stepped off her old life tonight. There was no clean way back. Somewhere in the city, the hunt tightened, but here, in the frozen shell by the river, an alliance took shape, not born of heroics, but of necessity, fear, and a shared refusal to look away. The snow began again just before dawn, not heavy, not gentle, but deliberate, as if the city itself were trying to erase its own footprints. Minneapolis slept under a pale sky when Ronan Vale and Mira Halden moved from shadow to shadow along the financial district's service corridors, their breaths steady, their timing exact. This was not recklessness. It was inevitability. Stoneville Group's transfer window was narrow, the data from Frostkline precise to the minute. If the shipment lifted from the rooftop helipad, it would vanish into the kind of airspace where paperwork replaced law and silence replaced justice. Galen would become another footnote, another unfortunate casualty, and Ronan could not allow that. They had not slept. They had not eaten properly. Fatigue sat behind Ronan's eyes like a second skull, but his body moved on habit and resolve. At 38, his broad shoulders carried old injuries and newer grief. His beard darkened with frost, his jaw set in a line that had learned restraint the hard way. He wore no uniform, no insignia, only layers chosen for warmth and silence. Mira followed close behind him, taller than she realized. She was her slim frame wrapped in borrowed tactical clothing that felt alien and heavy. Her dark blonde hair was braided tight against her head, her pale skin drawn but focused. Fear still lived in her, but it no longer commanded her. She had crossed that line hours ago in the warehouse by the river when she chose to stay. Sable moved ahead of them, the German shepherd's black and tan coat nearly invisible against the night. At 4 years old, he was at the height of his strength and clarity, muscles flowing smoothly beneath his fur-amber eyes, alert and calm. His ears flicked at distant sounds, elevators humming, ventilation fans coughing, filtering danger from noise. To Ronan, Sable was not just protection. He was memory, discipline, and trust made flesh. They entered through a maintenance level bypassing cameras Ronan had memorized from Galen's files. Stoneveil's building rose above them like a polished blade glass, and steel clean lines masking rot. Each stairwell was colder than the last. The wind sneaking in through seams never meant to matter. By the time they reached the upper floors, Mira's hands were numb despite her gloves. Ronan slowed once, just long enough to meet her eyes. "This ends tonight," he said quietly. "Whatever happens after, we live with it." Mira nodded. She had stitched wounds that changed lives forever. She understood what endings cost. The penthouse level was silent in the way expensive spaces often are, insulated from consequence. The doors slid open without alarm, another arrogance Galen had documented. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and citrus cleaner. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city below, its grid of lights blurred by falling snow. At the center of it all stood Eldon Sorin. Eldon was smaller than Ronan expected his power, not in his size, but in his precision. In his early 50s, he wore a tailored charcoal coat over a suit that fit him like a promise kept. His hair was silver at the temples, neatly combed back his face, narrow and smooth, unmarred by doubt. His eyes, however, were cold, calculating, patient, the eyes of a man who believed himself untouchable because systems bent around him. He turned as they entered, expression composed, almost amused. "Mr. Vale," Eldon said softly, "you're persistent. Your cousin was the same way." Ronan felt the words land like stones, but he did not react. He stepped forward, Sable at his side. "The shipment stops," Ronan said. "Tonight." Eldon smiled faintly and gestured. From a side corridor, two armed men appeared, efficient and anonymous, the kind of professionals who treated violence like paperwork. Mira felt the barrel of a gun press against her back before she could move. Another hand seized Sable's collar, yanking him short. The pivot was brutal in its simplicity. Eldon did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He merely demonstrated leverage. "You misunderstand," Eldon said. "This was never about winning. It's about control." Ronan lunged, but the butt of a rifle caught his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Another blow sent him to one knee. He tasted blood copper sharp on his tongue, the world narrowing to pain and white light. He stayed down, not because he was beaten, but because he was thinking. Eldon watched him with mild curiosity. "You see," he continued, "truth only matters when someone is willing to enforce it. I enforce reality." What Eldon did not see, what he had not accounted for, was the small device taped beneath Ronan's inner sleeve, salvaged weeks ago from a forgotten cache. Ronan waited for the guard holding Sable to shift his grip, waited for the exact moment when certainty relaxed into routine. Then he triggered it. The jammer screamed softly, a sound felt more than heard. Lights flickered. The security panel near the windows went dark. Electronic locks stuttered and failed. Sable exploded into motion. The guard holding him never had time to react. Sable wrenched free, slamming his weight into the man's legs, teeth finding fabric, then flesh. Mira twisted away as the second guard fired blindly, her training new but hard-earned taking over. She dropped to one knee and fired once, the shot cracking loud in the enclosed space. It missed its target by inches, but bought the second Ronan needed. Ronan surged to his feet despite the pain, moving with the grim economy of a man who had decided there would be no retreat. He disarmed the nearest guard and drove him into the glass wall, the impact spider-webbing across the surface. Sable released and re-engaged without command, a dark blur against the pale floor. Eldon backed away, composure cracking at last. They drove him upward step by step through a service door and onto the rooftop. The wind hit them like a living thing. Snow whipped sideways, stinging skin and eyes. The helipad lights glowed harsh white, illuminating the sleek shape of a helicopter, already warming its rotors. Eldon broke into a run, shouting orders into a headset. Ronan followed, lungs burning every step, a promise to Galen's memory. The helicopter lifted just as Ronan reached it. He leapt, fingers locking around the landing skid, his shoulders screaming in protest. The aircraft yawed, destabilized by the sudden weight. Eldon watched from the open door, terror finally eclipsing control. The fight was chaos and motion wind, metal bodies colliding. Ronan forced his way inside the two of them, grappling as the pilot struggled to regain control. In the struggle, the helicopter dipped too low, its skids clipping a crane arm. The impact sent them spiraling. They hit the frozen river hard. Ice shattered like gunfire. Water surged black and lethal, dragging them down. Ronan fought his way free, lungs on fire, instinct screaming. He found Eldon tangled in his coat, unconscious, and for one suspended moment considered letting go, letting the river decide. Then Galen's face rose in his mind, not angry, not afraid, but stubbornly hopeful. Ronan hauled Eldon upward, breaking through ice into air that burned colder than fire. They collapsed near the bank bodies, shaking uncontrollably. Snow fell on them both, indifferent. Lights flared. Federal vehicles skidded to a stop. Voices shouted. An agent knelt beside Ronan, sharp-eyed, controlled the look of someone who had waited a long time for this night. The files came through, the agent said. Your cousin set a dead man switch. Stoneville's finished. Eldon was cuffed, dragged away, still breathing. Months later, the snow melted early. Ronan stood at Galen's grave under a clear blue sky, Mira's hand warm in his. Sable sat at his feet, whole and healed, ears lifting in the spring breeze. The city felt quieter now, not because it was innocent, but because some truths had been spoken aloud. Ronan did not return to war. He opened a small rehabilitation center on the outskirts of the city, working with dogs deemed too broken for service, teaching patience instead of force. Mira stayed in medicine, but she walked differently now, steadier, aware that courage came in many forms. Forgiveness did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like dawn over snow, earned, fragile, and real. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive as thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes it comes quietly through a stranger who steps between danger and innocence, through a loyal dog who refuses to abandon his calling, through a wounded heart that still chooses to protect instead of hate. God does not always remove the storm. Often he sends strength to walk through it. Ronan's journey reminds us that faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to act when fear is present. That forgiveness does not mean forgetting pain, but refusing to let pain become our master. That even in a broken world, truth still matters, and when it is guarded with love, God can turn suffering into purpose. In our daily lives, we may never face rooftops, gunfire, or frozen rivers, but we all face moments where silence is easier than standing up, moments where kindness costs us something, moments where we must decide who we are when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you you are never alone. God walks beside the quiet, the weary, and the brave. A prayer. May God protect you and your loved ones. May He place angels on your path and courage in your heart. May He heal what is broken, guide your steps toward the light, and grant you peace in the storms you cannot avoid. If you believe in God's protection and quiet miracles, type Amen in the comments below. Call to action. If this story inspired you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Like the video to support meaningful stories. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a journey of courage, faith, and redemption. May God bless you, watch over you, and lead you safely home.